You're listening to the Pace Radio Network, here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Hello and welcome to the Mushie Moment with myself and my awesome co-host, Reverend Cindy. We're live today on Tuesday, April 25th, 2023 on paceradio.net, CBG TV, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Boxcast, Roku, and Fire Stick. And today we've got an awesome guest for you. But first, how you doing, Cindy?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty darn good myself. So what do you got that's new? What's new for news?
What's new for news? We have a pretty incredible guest on the show today. We just came back from more psychedelic spiritual medicine. And I bought a camper van. So the next time I come out, I can drive around camp.
And what kind of a camper van is it?
It's a VW Westphalia.
You hippie chick.
Yes, sir.
Our guest today is author extraordinaire. He's an editor. He's the one of the main organizers in the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference here in Vancouver. He's got a pretty darn good vision all the way around. And his name is Stephen Gray. And he's the editor of this newly released book that I was lucky enough to go to the book release party on. Hello, Stephen Gray. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks.
Was that a good enough build-up?
Oh, yeah, no problem. No worries, mate.
So we like to start with one, fairly simple yet cool question that sometimes eats up quite a bit of time.
I can imagine.
What is it that brought you to the position you're in your journey?
Right. As you say, that's it's hard to decide how much to say about that one, because at my age, there's a fairly long trail of the good, the bad, and the indifferent behind me at this point, But I'll start by confessing my age. Or at least my age group. I grew up. I came of age, you might say, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, which was pretty much the peak. Certainly in Canada, we were always a couple of years behind the U.S., especially California, but pretty much the peak of an era that was often referred to as the countercultural era. Sort of the pejorative term these days to describe the people of that time that picked up on that whole theme or thread was hippies, but we didn't call ourselves hippies at that point. In fact, I could get waylaid here, but the word that, people often take a word that's meant as an insult and they turn it around. So, black people take slur words and turn them around to make them words of pride. And so we called ourselves freaks. Like, in other words, a freak to the culture that we thought was pretty freaky. Anyway, so that my interest in this stuff goes back to then. There was I'll try to keep it short, but there was a kind of a marriage of interest in spirituality, particularly Asian spirituality and psychedelics at that time. And cannabis, of course, was a really big part of all that. And I got interested in both of those streams, if you will. And then that led to, there was a meme kind of going around at the time, which was, okay, so maybe you've had some amazing experiences, seen God or whatever on your psychedelic journey, but what are you going to do with the rest of your life? You can't just keep, going back to say hello there without doing something to ground that into your daily life. So for many people, it was something like meditation or yoga or whatever. For me, that became Tibetan Buddhism. Took me away from psychedelics for about 10 years or so, but then good old Terence McKenna reintroduced me to all that in the late 80s, and I suddenly went, oh, okay, right, psychedelics and ancient spirituality, they're they're connected very much so, right? So I got back into it, and a whole bunch of things have happened since then. I've done ayahuasca, lots of ayahuasca ceremonies, connected in more recent years with the Santo Daime, people who do ayahuasca in their church services, Native American church with peyote prayer ceremonies, etc. And then this conference that you mentioned in the intro, and then the Cannabist book that came out in 2016, Cannabis and Spirituality, and now this new one that you guys have displayed there. So it's all kind of, been a long journey that's led to this moment.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I bet there's even better stories in there somewhere, though.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
that's
how did Terence McKenna reintroduce you?
Yeah, well, not
Yeah.
I did actually. Well, actually, I don't want to get too far into this one, but I was living in Los Angeles in the late 1980s. I was down there for 3 years, and somewhat near the end of that, their version of the Georgia Straight, basically the LA Weekly, kind of a similar format but way bigger because it was LA. The front cover of so it was a weekly, and the front cover, it had a head-to-toe photograph of Terence McKenna and an article about him, and it mentioned that he was doing something that weekend up in Ojai. It was about an hour or so north of LA. So I went for one of the 2 days and heard him talk and bought some of his tapes and a book and stuff, and that was how I got connected. I never actually knew him beyond that.
So when does Dennis McKenna come into your life?
Oh, well, actually, my first meeting with Dennis, he might remember it now because I've reminded him a couple of times. I was at a conference in Iquitos, Peru. That's in the north of Peru, in the Amazon jungle, which became a kind of a center for ayahuasca work and then ayahuasca tourism, which is has its pros and its cons as well. But nonetheless, I was at a conference, and Dennis was the opening keynote speaker. I had never met him before. I knew who he was, of course, through the books that he and his brother did. After he gave a really good talk, and after his talk, I buttonholed him and I said, "Hey, nice to meet you. I've read a lot of the work, et cetera, and I really liked your talk." And he said, Dennis has always been humble, in my opinion, anyway. And he said, "Well, my brother's the one with the silver tongue." So that was my first meeting with Dennis.
So you had a chance to meet Dennis and a chance to chat with him. I noticed that you spoke about ayahuasca. Was that the first psychedelic that you went to do?
Oh, heck no. Like I say, I'm I'm from the LSD generation. So my first psychedelic, actually, don't want to get distracted on this one, sidetracked on this one either, but in my personal cosmology, cannabis is a psychedelic. It's not biochemically a psychedelic, but functionally, if you use it as a spiritual medicine, I consider it a psychedelic. So that goes back to that time as well. But when I was about, I don't know how old, 19 or 20, I started taking LSD. Probably did it 20 or 25 times before I, as I said, decided that I needed an ongoing practice and got involved with Tibetan Buddhism. So the first time I actually ever did ayahuasca, I think it was around 1992. I went to a conference somewhere, met a guy from Seattle who had a connection with the guy whose conference I ended up going to. He was from down there, but he was originally an American, and he had come up to the Seattle area to do a couple of ayahuasca ceremonies, like a Friday and a Saturday night. Okay, so you guys seem to like stories, so I'll tell you one story about that. Until that time, and probably more or less still, I don't consider myself, the record shows that I'm not particularly attuned to otherworldly or paranormal type experiences, if you want to call them that. I don't even know what the term is particularly. But this particular fellow, his name was Alan Shoemaker, he told us at the beginning that if you have trouble it was in a yurt, and everybody was lying down on their mattresses, including him. Strangely enough, I suppose most people sit up and kind of lead it, but he just lies down with everybody else. Anyway, he put a mattress out in front of him, and he said, "If you have trouble, just come over here, and I'll sing you one of the Icaros, they call them, the songs, and I'll do a little, like, I'll shake this thing around you. It's called a shikapa they use, you know." So this medicine came on like a bloody freight train, just as if it was racing down a hill. And it was almost as if somebody had opened a lid and a whole bunch of chaotic things all came flying out. So I just felt like this, an onslaught of stuff coming at me. And it was terrifying. It was really, ultimately, and this is a central thing with psychedelics, of course, is it was really about, being hit really hard with the invocation to die, ego-wise, right? And that was, suddenly too much for me. Like, holy mackerel! So then I went, oh yeah. So Alan said you could go over there. So I was so overwhelmed and shaky that I couldn't even walk. So I literally crawled. I was on the opposite side of the yurt, and I literally crawled across the yurt and tapped him on the foot because, as I said, he was lying down. And I said, "Yeah, I'm having a little trouble. You said you come over for some help." He said, "Yeah, sure. Lie down on the mattress." And he sang an Icaro and shook the shikapa around my head and neck and so on. And at the end, he sat me up and he said, when you have that kind of experience, it's just your ego hanging on, and you just need to trust the experience. And I still didn't feel any different. I still felt really shaky and kind of scared. So then, he left me. I looked back at my spot across the room, realized I still wasn't capable of walking, crawled back across the floor. I got about 6 feet away from my mattress, and in totally suddenly, like in no time or in a nanosecond, I got taken over by a large cat, like a jaguar or something like that. It just entered my body. It became me, or I became it, or something like that. And in no time, I went from being this shaky, scared kind of, kid or whatever, to suddenly feeling completely confident, completely graceful, and delighted, actually. And it was such a palpable experience for me that my buddy who had come with me and who was lying down with his eyes closed, lying down on the next mattress, sat up like this and went, "What?" Because he thought it was a black big cat coming toward him, right? And so it only lasted for, I don't know, a minute or something while this cat took me to my mattress, and then it dumped me off and left me. But it left me in a state of complete bliss and joy for the whole rest of the evening. So there's my first ayahuasca story there. Yeah.
Nice. I like to call them mystic experiences.
Yeah, sure. I call it that. The rest of the evening, actually, I had a very strong sense that there were beings above us, I didn't see anything. I didn't have any more visuals for the rest of the night. It was a felt experience. And I remember I got into a conversation with them, and it wasn't, like an auditory thing. It was, telepathy or whatever, but I'm going, "Who are you?" And they said something like, "Well, we're here to empower you all and give you, some, I don't know, transmission or empowerment for the work ahead for yourself." Right. But they felt like they were there. I mean, the whole night, the whole next 4 hours or so. And they felt to me like royalty was the term that came to my mind, like
Wow.
royal beings of some kind or another. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, ayahuasca is not hasn't been about going to other worlds particularly, as it is for some people, For me, it's about, and I think this is an opinion, but I think these medicines, their best use on the planet now is to be here, to connect more with who we are on the ground here, and wake up to our true selves, our naturally existing selves of people who are awake, at peace, and compassionate, open-hearted, etc., and creative, of course. So when I felt like I've had contact with the others, if you will, on ayahuasca, it's more been about them teaching me how to be, more me or whatever, right? The strongest ayahuasca experience I ever had some years later, which was actually down as part of that conference that I mentioned earlier in Iquitos. It was so strong that normally those people, they pretty much always start right at 8 o'clock, and by around about 3 or 4 in the morning, you're ready to sleep. You get about 3, 4, 5 hours of sleep, get up in the morning, and then they have a sharing session, and then on your way. Well, this particular night, I didn't get a wink of sleep all night. I was flying right until like 8 in the morning, and then it's like, okay, everybody, wake up. We're going to have our sharing now. So at some point, I felt the presence of beings again. And I said, who are you? And the answer came back. They didn't say what they were. They said, we offer love. It's limitless. And the only decision you have to make in your life is how much of it to accept. So, simple, short, but, pretty pithy.
I had a similar message delivered, yes. And it was all in the essence of love.
I did, but from DMT. I had the same message, but I got it from DMT. Yeah.
Right. Well, they're all there to break through our thick skulls, as it were, not to, again, go off on too wild of a tangent, but my belief is that there are ready and willing helping guides and spirits at all times, but we have created such thick barriers that they have difficulty, getting our attention. That's one of the reasons that psychedelics are so potentially valuable, because they tend to break down those walls. But there are other ways too. And I've always been really interested in, for example, tarot cards, because I figure they're going to get in any way they can, So tarot cards, actually, I've had a bunch of experiences with them where it's like, holy mackerel, there's something going on here, right? Basically, what I'm saying is the spirits, whatever you want to call them, the helpers, the guides, the teachers in the other world, so to speak, are ready, willing, and able anytime we can create an opening for them.
I think that's one of the reasons that we tend to have so much noise in society is if there's lots of noise, you don't hear the subtle hints.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean complete noise, visual, audio, there's just too much noise, and therefore you miss the subtle signs.
Absolutely. No, we could talk about that one for hours. A little anecdote pops into mind. There was a Zen teacher. He was running the San Francisco Zen Center. I think it was Suzuki Roshi, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, but it might have been another one. Anyway, one of the stories in the book, in some book somewhere, was they were on a busy street. This was like a second floor of some building, maybe in San Francisco, and it was on a busy street. And they didn't have air conditioning, so the windows were open, and there was noise coming in from the street. And one of the students complained to the teacher about that, and the teacher said, "Just be thankful that don't worry about that outer distraction. What's really at issue here is the noise in your head, right?" So that's actually central to this whole thing with all these medicines, is that, we have to get out of our way. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge for me. It's a challenge for, most people. And it's central to Buddhist teaching. It's essentially a universal teaching, which is, well, the way the Buddhists talk about it is that the noise that we generate in our minds, in our heads, they call it discursive thinking. You could just call it thinking of any kind, like whether it's a song running through, endlessly, or just you're thinking about tomorrow or yesterday or whatever, anything, even like being distracted by the pain in your knee can be considered thinking, if you're obsessing on it or focusing on it. But what we're doing is, the way the Buddhists teach it or talk about it, is we're generating a screen of obscurity between us and reality. When we do that, like this sort of overlapping thing creates a wall, or my old Buddhist teacher called it the cocoon that we kind of barricade ourselves inside, in that sense, right? And so that whole idea of calming the mind, quieting the mind, is essential. It's central to everything that we're doing in this work of waking up.
Well, I have to say that's one thing. Cindy and I are both CPTSD. which in itself, from a young age starts to create brain noise. It creates dysfunctional patterns, and a lot of it is thinking patterns with brain noise going on.
Yeah.
And, I've been trying to meditate for quite a while, and I hit my levels of, and, I've been doing my routines. But the one thing I have to say that we did the Cambo, which physically let my body hit a place of relaxation that I could never consciously hit because I didn't know that place.
Mm.
And my brain fought for a couple of days to catch up to it. And now we just did a 5-MeO with Gareth Moxie.
I know Gareth.
Yeah, so we just did a 5-MeO session with him. And what I found there was it was a next level of, it enabled my brain to find that piece of quiet. So I actually know now it's there and I can find it. But now I know what I'm looking for, because I'd never experienced that. I didn't even know what it was I'm looking for.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. If you don't know, when one of my favorite little sayings is, I don't know if you guys remember the old baseball manager, coach, catcher, etc., Yogi Berra from the
yeah.
Well, he was kind of famous for these sort of malapropisms where he'd say something that you kind of go like, does that actually make sense? But then you realize the meaning was there. And he said something like, if you don't know where you're going, or you should know where you're going, otherwise you'll end up somewhere else. So if you don't have a vision or an idea, like you just said, Steve, that such a thing is possible, then how can you work toward it or aspire to it or anything like that? And I think I sometimes call it the open secret. It's like, it's our true nature. Most people don't realize, I think this is still true. Most people don't realize that it's in that gap, where we're able to quiet our minds, where we're able to get out of our own way, and the spirit is there, or reality is there, or however you want to term it, right? The poet, Persian mystic poet Rumi, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's got all kinds of tasty little, lines and quatrains and stuff on that theme, like, don't let your thoughts cover the moon of your heart, that kind of thing, or let silence take you to the core of life, or silence is the language of God, all else is poor translation, right? In other words, silence meaning quieting the mind. And yes, and once you've had those experiences, that doesn't necessarily make it, particularly easy to nurture and develop and encourage that.
I know I'm going to be struggling to find it. Because the brain wants to do, but you have to undo to achieve that.
Yeah.
You can't do it. For me, it's a real struggle, but I know it's possible, and I know it's about letting go.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's an ongoing moment by moment practice too. I have a book. I thought maybe it's here, but it's not here. I had never heard of this guy before, but somebody recommended him to me, and said, I think you'd like this guy, because I've read a lot of, whatever Buddhist teachings and other kinds of teachings and psychedelic books and all that. Anyway, this guy's name is Vernon Howard. He wrote some books in the late 60s and early 70s, and this particular book is called The Mystic Path to Cosmic Power. Bit of a sort of a glorified title, but very, very practical guidance. And he says, first of all, I'm not making this up. It's not a theory. It's based on my experience, but also I've read all the great mystics, from the East, and the Christian esoteric traditions, et cetera, et cetera. And if there's one thing that they'd all agree on, it's this: that the most important thing you can do, if your intention is to wake up spiritually, is to pay attention to what arises in your mind. Don't obsess on it. We're not talking navel-gazing narcissism here or self-absorption. It's not about analyzing it. It's like, observe what comes up in your mind, because that's what's causing you to live your life the way that you do. And when you see it, take a neutral attitude toward it. Totally neutral. In the Buddhist teachings with the meditation practice, they say no praise, no blame. Like, You're not the greatest in the world, and you're not a dickhead, or maybe you are a dickhead, but you got to let you have to look at those thoughts as independent things. My old Buddhist teacher called them temporary clouds, or one time he even called them temporary vomit. But it's just that stuff comes up. You take a neutral attitude toward it and release it, and sure, it'll come back. But you keep doing that. The theory or the hypothesis is that these thoughts, which are directing your life, will start to lose their power. And it sounds simple, but it's extremely difficult in some ways, and it does take ongoing.
It is.
Yeah, it takes ongoing practice throughout the day. I mean, it's not like you're doing you're going to go off and do this sort of special practice. It's like going from here to the kitchen. Pay attention, like notice, there's just stuff going on in my mind. It didn't really have to be there at all. Just come back to being in your body on the ground. That's why I say the psychedelics.
You know where I get stuck? The thoughts come in, and instead of analyzing the thoughts, I go, why am I having those? And then I go down that thinking rabbit hole.
Right. So the teaching is, for that is, as soon as you recognize that, just let it go. Just let it go right there and then. And the breath, I consider breath the best guru on the planet, right? If you can come back to your breath. Eckhart Tolle had some really interesting things to say about that in his book, The Power of Now, about 20 years ago or whatever. Yeah. He said, you don't necessarily have to be sitting down to meditate. I think that's a good thing to do. But he said, you can do this anywhere. Standing up at the office, whatever, walking to the bus, washing the dishes. He said, well, I don't know if I remember this exactly right, but this is what works for me when I do it is feel your feet on the ground. Feel that you're standing on the ground. And if you notice your feet, you'll kind of automatically notice the rest of your body. And then are you breathing? Or in other words, you are breathing. Everybody's breathing, or we die, of course. But are you restricting that breathing? Are you breathing shallowly into your chest? Are you holding on tensions? Let the breath go. Let it happen. And then this, as I say, being aware of the thoughts that come up. It's actually. When I say it's challenging because of the sort of insistence of that thinking mind, for one thing, but it's also a humbling practice or journey or path, because it requires you to look at the quote unquote dark side. The dark side almost sounds like super ominous or something, but those little things, your selfishness, your greed, your fear, your anxiety, your depression, your anger, just acknowledge them, and if you're really honest about that, I'm still working on it, like most people, I guess. It's humbling, because you go, oh yeah, there's an old Sufi saying, the Sufis were the mystical tradition within Islam, the Muslims, anyway. There's an old Sufi saying, which is, you're not as good a person as you think you are, and you don't have as many friends as you think you have. So the not as good a person as you think you are is the part that I'm kind of referring to here. That we'd like to kind of ignore the humbling or the dark side stuff and just think of ourselves as these good people or whatever. But we have to acknowledge all those little 7 deadly sins or whatever they are in ourselves without judgment. Right? That's the key. Right? The neutral. Take a neutral.
At that thought, that's a great time for us to take a moment and thank our sponsors.
I think it is, and I think you were laughing because he just pretty much put my whole lessons that I just had smack in front of my face again.
I have the thoughts of thank you, Stephen Gray, because that was I know that you were speaking, but I don't think you realize how loud you were speaking to Steve in particular, but to both of us, because it's a lesson that he learned just over a week ago when we went and did Toad Bufo.
Sweet.
Observe.
Yeah.
And you literally spoke the words that yeah.
You needed to hear, to be honest. But we can chat about that when we come back after the break.
Okay, let's where do I go? Oh, I go, hey, it's break time. Time to check out sponsors and pay some bills. You're here with us live on the Mushie Moment on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Boxcast, CBG TV, and paceradio.net. And we'll be right back with Stephen Gray. Hang out.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
In February of 2022, the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club and Ted Smith were fined $6.5 million. This for helping 8,500 patients with access to medical cannabis. In our interview with Ted, he spoke to us about how people can donate to help in an upcoming court challenge. And here is part of that interview. From what I've seen lately, I believe that you've got something that you're trying to do as far as fundraising to deal with this next court challenge.
For now, people can write checks directly to Jack Lloyd Law Corporation or send e-transfers to save the VCBC at gmail.com. I guess those are the two easiest ways for people to help right now.
What do you find at paceradio.net? People advocating cannabis education.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Cannabis edibles are an effective way to manage pain and other ailments, especially when you deal with your trusted partner, Legacy 420, in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. You see, we lab test every product on site to ensure proper dosage every time, which is critical when consuming cannabis edibles. All Legacy 420 edibles are made by our classically trained baker and chocolatier, and we also have super tasty vegan options.
Our baker has been in the industry for 25 years. She's also a chocolatier. Everything from savory to sweet, your chocolate bars, brownies, butter tarts, you name it, we make it.
Talk to our knowledgeable Cannatex about our incredible variety available. Give your trusted partners a call. Legacy 420 out on your road.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
Welcome back to the Mushie Moment, streaming live to you here at paceradio.net, cbgtv.com, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Boxcast, Roku, and Fire Stick. I'm here with my co-host Cindy and the awesome and ever-entertaining Stephen Gray. I need to ask, did you ever have any dealings with Alan Watts?
Not personally, no. I never met him.
No.
But he was definitely an influence on me. In fact, I think he had a little book called The Book, and the subtitle was On the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. And I believe that was the first spiritual book I ever read, especially anything beyond, our kind of Western Christian, whatever, conventional stuff. Yeah, so that book influenced me. We're talking, 50 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
I liked him. Oh, I can tell you a story about him, though. Short one, if you want.
Okay.
I hope we can talk a little bit more about the book at some point.
Yeah,
but,
that was coming up next.
Yeah, good. You familiar with Hollyhock?
Yeah.
Up on Gabriola? Pardon me, Cortez Island. Yeah, well, before it was Hollyhock, it was called Cold Mountain Institute. back in the 70s, and it was modeled after a place that's, I think, still around called Esalen Institute on the coast of California, where they brought all kinds of great people together and had all kinds of workshops. Terrence McKenna talked there a lot. All kinds of people have been there. Stan Groff, Andy Weil, all these amazing figures have passed through Esalen. Well, they were holding workshops and things up at Cold Mountain Institute back in those days as well. You know what? I just realized I got distracted by my mind went to Esalen for a moment, and I was picturing all that stuff, and I forgot why I was going to tell you that. Now, Alan Watts. Thank you. He came to Cold Mountain Institute. I wasn't there at the time. He had already been there. And so there were people that worked there that told me stories about him. Well, this is kind of a mystery, I wonder, about Alan. He was a brilliant guy, wonderful person, I think, in a lot of ways, and certainly brilliant and very visionary, but he was an alcoholic. And I don't know why he couldn't, I suppose you could say, couldn't handle that presence that he had. He did amazing things. He had studied Buddhism for a long time, and then he decided that the best way to reach a Western audience was to, in terms of spiritual teachings, was to sort of join that world. And he got himself trained as I think an Episcopal minister of some kind, and he got the gig as the minister or priest of a large church in, I think, Chicago, and he started turning things around and doing like a Christian church, and started doing things like Gregorian chant and really interesting things like that. Anyway, he came to Cold Mountain Institute and he gave some talks, and a woman, I did meet this woman that was there with him. She was a Tai Chi teacher, I think. Anyway, Judith Weaver. And she said that he gave her the sloppiest massage she's ever had in her life. Anyway, so I don't mean to make light of Alan. He was a very important influence on the culture, really.
Oh, I just love some of the stuff that he's.
Yeah, no, he was brilliant. Yeah,
lectures.
Yeah,
it was incredible. So now we get into this, because you didn't write this. Now you're an author, and in this one you're the editor, which means you had to read everything and decide that you wanted to be the guy editing.
Well, okay, so that kind of came out of partly the fact that I've been co-organizing the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference for the last 12 years or so. 14 of the people in that book have spoken at this conference before, so I already knew a lot of these people. And I started to think it was a gradually developing or evolving desire or mission or whatever, was to put out a book where with the collected wisdom of a lot of these people on the title, how psychedelics can help save the world. So ultimately, it's not about the psychedelics themselves. It's about that, like what is the role of psychedelics? How can wisely used psychedelics contribute to the change of consciousness that needs to spread around this world at this time, right? So I just kind of contacted a bunch of these people, many, as I say, of whom I already knew, and said, here's what I'm thinking, and, would you contribute? And I don't think anyone said no, actually. I think pretty much everyone was jumping on board. So that's how that came about, basically.
And of all the contributions, is there anything in there that you think is profound?
I think it's all profound, honestly. I do. In their own way. There's such a variety of voices. There are 4 or 5 people from indigenous backgrounds. There are the somewhat more academic leaning, but there's no real it's not an academic book. It's meant to be read and understood by any layperson, basically. But I could give you a couple of examples. I mean, one doesn't want to. I mean, if the contributors were watching this, I wouldn't want them to go, "Oh, he's picking favorites," But
I thought about that when I asked, but
yeah. But I will mention a couple. Chris Beisch is an amazing guy. I deliberately put his chapter first after the foreword and the introduction because I wanted him to set the tone. Because he has an incredible grasp of what I call the big picture. And if we have enough time, probably what I should do is just give you a quick rundown on who Chris Bache is. He has this book called LSD and the Mind of the Universe. It's a remarkable book. Chris is now retired. He was a religion and philosophy professor at Youngstown, Ohio State University. And early in his career, he decided to undertake the Stanislav Grof protocol of doing high-dose LSD with a sitter, with eye shades and a curated playlist of music. And he would do that on a Saturday. And then the other part of the Grof protocol was take the next day and transcribe everything meticulously, fastidiously, even to the point Chris would put on the headphones again. So he'd hear a certain piece of music and he'd go, oh yeah, that reminds me of this thing that was going on at that moment, right? So he did 73 sessions like that over 20 years. 500 to 600 micrograms each time. Very, very high dose stuff. And in his book, he says that the first 2 hours were often really difficult, sometimes even extremely painful, as he went through layers and layers of ego death, like ego death of everything that he identified with as his personality of Chris Bache, etc. But even dying to the species ego in a sense. And then because he was able to do that, not everyone could do that. I know I couldn't do that. He broke out into this, like what he sometimes calls the vast intelligences of the universe, and started receiving downloads, teachings, and all kinds of amazing things. But for the purposes of the book and the mission of the book, the latter third or so of that 20-year period, he started receiving more and more messages that we are going through. We're now into it. We're going through what Chris calls a death and rebirth cycle. So the death part is that we have to, as a species, but individually, of course, but as a species, we have to let go of the dysfunctional ways that we are living on this planet. Right? It's not sustainable. It's an illusion. This is basic Buddhist teaching too, right? The ego mind is a mind of illusion. It's based on a series of stories, concepts, and beliefs that we tell ourselves to create some idea of what we think is reality. But as I mentioned about Rumi earlier, the silence is the language of God. It's in the between all that, when we're able to empty out of that story of ourselves, so to speak, that we can enter into this reality. And as you mentioned earlier, Steve, if you don't even have any idea it's there, you won't even know what to go toward, right? But anyway, Chris got into those states, downloaded this information, which over the last third or so of the 20-year period became increasingly clear or even confident that we are going to go through this process. We are already into it. It's going to be probably quite painful and difficult for an unknown period of time, but that if enough of us pay attention, do the inner work that we need to, and then take that out into the outer work that can be done in whatever way that is, then we have the possibility of what another contributor in the book calls the birth of a mature planetary civilization. So Chris is amazing on all that stuff, and I know him fairly well personally. He walks the talk. He's one of the most kind-hearted, open-hearted people I've ever met in my life, Just picking at random, there's 25 chapters. Another favorite one from a completely different angle is Tyson Yunkaporta. Just try to remember that, folks. Good luck with that. Tyson Yunkaporta. If you get the book, you can see it. Tyson is a Australian Aboriginal. He's an academic researcher and a wood carver, but he's lived a lot with the Aboriginal people in his life. And his thing is, he has a lot of amazing things about the way he has an amazing book, in my opinion, called Sand Talk. The subtitle is How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. So he knows a lot about their worldview and how it's an antidote to this dysfunctional way that we're running things, so to speak. But he also talks about psychedelics, and he of all the voices in the book, he's the most sort of cautionary in the sense that he does not telling people don't do it, but basically what he says is, if you're not connected to earth and community, to the rock beneath your feet, and you're, as he put it, charging off into orgasming into the cosmos in all your glorious splendor, you're not probably actually learning anything that's going to serve you and the community for the long haul, right? He said, if you do it right, you might only need to do that medicine once or twice, right? And then actually, I'm not sure if it's in his chapter. I've also interviewed him on my Stephen Gray Vision YouTube channel, and it might have been there where he says that about 15 years ago, he had a huge dose journey on San Pedro cactus, also AKA Huachuma, right?
Yeah.
He said, I learned so much in that one journey. He said it was about a 12-hour journey. He said, I learned so much in that journey that I don't think I ever need to do that again. He said, I learned about the way that I relate to the world. He said, I learned everything I needed to know about how to treat women properly that I hadn't known before that. In his book, Sand Talk, he has these little sort of like mandala-like looking drawing figures, symbols. They're symbols. And he said he saw all those symbols in that journey. And then years later, an old native or Aboriginal elder showed him the symbols, like said, here, you could learn from these symbols. And he said, those are the same symbols I saw in my San Pedro journey 10 years ago, right? So basically, he's wonderful. His chapter is really important for people to recognize that there needs to be a connection to the earth, to the rock beneath your feet, so to speak, and the community that you're in, and can participate in and help with for these substances to be of use. That's two.
Yep.
Two really interesting ones. Yeah.
Now, you said something earlier that I kind of caught. Oh, go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm sure if we had enough time, we'd probably go through all the chapters and they would all be your favorite for different reasons.
Yeah, right. Okay, I can give you one more fairly quickly. This was like a 2-page chapter. It's Bruce Damer, who's also amazing. He's spoken. Oh, yeah, Bruce is wonderful. He's spoken at our conference, I think 3 times now, actually. Anyway, he had already written a chapter, but I knew this other story from him, which was that he was, he knew Terence McKenna really well. They were friends. So this particular little anecdote, Bruce wasn't there, but he knew the people that were there. And it was right at the very end. For those who don't know, Terence died, I think, around the age of 52 of a terrible frontal cortex brain cancer, inoperable, fairly rare, very severe, no hope, etc. Took him down at the age of about 52. So he was on a lot of medicines and he was kind of in and out and stuff like that. And right near the end, I'm not quite sure, but very close to the end of his life, a couple of friends there, the way Bruce tells it, and this is the last chapter of the book, apart from my conclusion, it's the title of the chapter is What Really Matters. Terence sat up straight, lucid, and said to the people in the room, psychedelics, they're not about ideas. They're not all about all that stuff I've been talking about for the last 20 years. They're about love. So that's kind of the concluding message of the book, right?
That's awesome.
That's
awesome.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the message that every time I've sat with the medicine, any medicine, whether it be LSD or mushrooms or iboga or DMT or Cambo or, we have done the Sananga and the rapé with the Cambo. I walk away from all of it knowing that I am nothing but pure love. And that is what we are supposed to give out. And that is what we are supposed to receive.
Well, somebody once said, I think it was actually a roadman running one of the Native American church ceremonies. Well, okay, how about another little story? His name was Canucus Littlefish, and he was a remarkable man, native person. I did about I don't know, 36 or so of those peyote prayer ceremonies. He was the road man, or the person who ran the majority of those, not all of those, but down in Washington State. So this one particular meeting, in the morning time, after you've gone through the whole night with the medicine and all that, is the time when people express themselves. And Ken said, oh, on this particular meeting, there may be like 40 people in the teepee, and there were about 6 or 7 that had never been to a meeting before. And he said, Ken said, or Kanuka said, oh, you new people here, you might be wondering what happened last night. He said, you're going to have to sit with this for 6 months or so to really know and keep doing it. But in the meantime, I'll tell you this. He said, what you experienced last night was reality. Okay. You experienced reality with this medicine. That's what these medicines are for, to introduce you into reality, right?
It dissolves the walls of fake boundaries that we've built, and actually does show us what true reality is. You said at one point, you said the mission of the book.
Yes.
But you didn't tell us what the mission is.
Well, I think it's more or less, expressed in the title of the book, that, psychedelics are, okay, so the premise is that we are in a crisis situation on the planet. The spiritual ignorance or disconnection that has pretty much pervaded the planet for a very long time. I mean, I'm generalizing, of course. There's always been individuals that have been more sensitive, more tuned in, more awake, et cetera, right? But, the way that this world has been run, as it were, and the mindset of almost everybody is what the Buddhists call samsara, the mind of confusion. We don't know who we are. We're, as I mentioned earlier, we've been making it up, from all these stories that we've embedded, that we've been taught from the moment we're, able to understand anything on this planet. We get fed stuff by our parents and our teachers and the world around us and everything. And we build up a sense of who we think we are and what we think is real or true or not true and all that stuff. But it's all just stories. It all lives here, right? And so the work is to see our way through that. This is why I mentioned Vernon Howard earlier, that just observe. That's part of the work, and that's one of the things that psychedelics do. They function kind of as truth serums. They can show you where you're blocking or suffering, and to bring that up for you to see and then release, hopefully, and carry on. But they also open you up to this unconditional reality as well, potentially, of course, right? So we are at a crisis point is the central, in a sense, contention of the book. And it's not just a few people saying this. I think most people on the planet would recognize that, we're in a pretty chaotic situation on the planet. I mean, even the climate itself, if it were nothing else, the climate is getting more extreme every year and is likely to make life on the material level more difficult. But at the same time, all these other things are happening, politically, economically, socially, all these things, more depression, more anxiety, all this stuff. So as I see it, what the world needs, as much as possible, for anyone who's open to hearing it, experiencing it, and, embedding it into their life, is that we are indeed going through a death and rebirth trajectory or journey on the planet. And if you just saw, this is almost a shop-worn metaphor now, but I like it anyway. If you were an alien from another planet where they didn't give birth the way we do, they had some other way of reproducing or whatever, and you sort of were looking down at the hospital room at the birth process, what you'd see is an extreme amount of pain, a lot of screaming, the woman going through all this, and then blood, and this gooey, bloody thing comes out, and then it starts screaming, and you're going, if you didn't know what this was, you'd just think, wow, that's a horror show, right? But what it is giving birth to new life, obviously. So if you don't have any understanding or vision, or haven't been told in any way that if things get weirder and woollier and scarier and less materially comfortable on this planet over the next decades or so, it's not just that we're going to hell in a handbasket. It's that we had to undo all the old ways. It had to happen. And the indigenous people have been telling us this in their visions for 500 years or more.
Yeah.
People like Chris Bache have been downloading it from their high-dose LSD journeys, and other mystics and psychonauts are all kind of saying a similar thing. We've reached a nexus point. All the indigenous prophecies, more or less, as I understand them, have pointed at this time. One of the chapters in the book is called The Turning of the Soil. Belinda Ariacho, a native woman from Arizona or New Mexico. And she says, this whole time is about us reconnecting to who we are and recognizing how we've sort of stepped off the path, if you will, So that's what the book is for, is to try to provide a message that, there is hope for the birth of a mature planetary civilization, or what Chris Bache calls the birth of the future human, which is the awakened being, Homo noeticus, sometimes people call it. That is our true nature. So it's not like we're trying to search for, yet another alternative or something. It's like when we can do the work that we need, like I said earlier, like the inner work of releasing and healing, and then step out with that into the world, then that's what, great teachings like Buddhism have been telling us for 2,500 years. This is who you really are, right? So it's an undoing process. It's not a grasp onto some new great, religion or anything like that. It's an undoing process that we're all ultimately capable of, is the teaching, and as you say, Steve, it ain't easy because we're so identified. I mean, think of it this way. Your whole identity in this life is built on this series of concepts and beliefs and stories you've told yourself, or we've told ourselves, right? And if everything is based on that, if your whole identity and self-esteem and copeability in the world and everything is all based on that, then anything else is shocking, right? The
Or
awakened
watching that belief system that you have fall apart. I watch guys that believe they're this, and then all of a sudden the job changes, the wife leaves, a couple shifts, and now they have no idea who they are.
Yes. And so typically what a person would do in that situation is try to reestablish another whole set of bulwarks or cocoons or whatever, right? And so what the teachings would be when you start to experience that sense of dissolving or whatever, then just stay with it, keep breathing, right? And then the same thing when you're in a journey, let me get a psychedelic journey, I love the way they've been talking about this work that's been done at Johns Hopkins University. They've shown this in films like Fantastic Fungi, for example. It's a wonderful film if you haven't seen it.
Yes.
Yeah. And, nearer the end, they interviewed a couple of the people from that, from one of the end of life psilocybin ones, And so basically what they say is, if you get scared, it's, again, it's that ego hanging on, or don't buy into it. Don't buy into any kind of a narrative about it, right? Just keep breathing and it will change. So I think it's that's the micro level in a way. And then there's the macro level on the planet. We need to teach ourselves, I think, to stay present as much as possible, just to keep breathing, stay out of our heads as much as possible, just be aware that way. And again, I want to stress that, as I understand it, and as the great teachers would say, I'm sure, this is not a self-absorbed narcissistic thing to do. It's actually the opposite, because you see yourself starting to go into the, analysis or whatever. That's just another thought, So your practice, your moment by moment walk through your day practice, ideally, is you recognize when that stuff comes up and you go, oh, I can let it go. I mean, obviously, we have these thinking minds for a reason, they're an amazing tool, right? No other species seems to have quite that sophisticated in thinking abilities, and we use them for all kinds of things, like what we're doing right now, obviously. But if that's all you do, if you can't let go of that, then in a sense you're missing reality, right?
Oh, yes.
Wow. Wow. This has been an incredible chat, and I'm really, really epically sad to say that we are at the end of the show.
We're hitting there. We need to get them to say where people can get the book and your other book, Cannabis and Spirituality, correct?
Yes, they're both are available in all the sort of usual channels. You know, they're on Amazon and online booksellers. I think all the major ones have it. And if your local bookstore doesn't carry it, I know you guys are, well, you're in Vancouver, Steve, anyway, and you're temporarily here, Cindy, anyway.
I'm back in Nova Scotia tomorrow.
We were just over at Banyan's as well. I was immediately going to say Banyan's. They're awesome.
Right. Well, you know, that they have it, and any bookseller worth their salt is going to carry books like that. And even if they don't, even if they're not like a psychedelics-oriented bookstore, they can order it for you. But, you know, you can get it in 3 days on Amazon if you need to as well. And the publisher themselves, their website, innertraditions.com, they have it. Oh, and also if you go to my website, which is, you were going to ask me about that anyway.
Scrolling across here.
Oh, yeah, there you go. StephenGrayVision.com. I made it easy for people. Actually, my friend Sophia did it for me, but nonetheless, right on the homepage, I think it says something like order book or something, and it'll give you links. I'm not selling it from the website. It'll give you links to Amazon and a few other sources like Barnes and Noble or whatever, Indigo, whatever, and people can get it that way. Yeah, so they're both widely available, both those books.
And what else will people find at StephenGrayVision.com?
What else? Some upcoming events, past events, interviews that I've done like this, we often put on there. There's a blog section. I haven't written much lately, but there's a bunch of articles that I've written in the past on there. That's about it. There's no jokes.
We're going to have you back, but I feel like you are full of wonderful stories, amazing advice, and I would love to hear more and more and more.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you for joining us here on the Mushie Moment with my co-host Cindy, myself, our awesome guest. Oh, where's my finger? There, you can tell I can't find the camera. Stephen Gray from StephenGrayVision.com is where you can find him. We're proud to be coming to you live from paceradio.net, cbgtv.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Boxcast, Roku, and Firestick. Thank you all for joining us here on the MushieMoment.com, and we'll see you next week. Much love, everybody.
Much love.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20, it's so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partner 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420, enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products, make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road. Legacy 420 in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
What do you find at paceradio.net? People advocating cannabis education.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more. We've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Are you a cannabis content creator? Are you looking for a place to have your content seen? If you answer yes to both questions, then you need to check out cbgtv.com. CBGTV broadcasting to a worldwide audience. Find us at cbgtv.com.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.